This is your daily dose of all things royal.
What is going on with Prince William? Someone seriously needs to stage an intervention about his climate activism. This week, he's been busy promoting the Earthshot Prize. This is a prize he founded in 2020, and Mike Bloomberg, the US billionaire, is a strategic funder. Bloomberg tends to fund a lot of these climate initiatives and make sure that he's seen everywhere next to Prince William. His Bloomberg Philanthropies in the logo behind Prince William. This time at London Climate Action Week, which of course Mike Bloomberg hasn't missed, along with his protege Sadiq Khan, Prince William sat next to Patty Harris, who is the CEO of Bloomberg Philanthropies, you guessed it. And he's also been photographed with Emma Watson, who was there for some reason. I think people think, oh, because she was Hermione in Harry Potter and she's quite good looking, that as long as she's there, we will buy into this activism. Prince William is completely siding with left-wing activists and their networks and their funders through his climate activities. You know, it looks really good on the surface, the Earthshot Prize, but it links to the United Nations, C40 cities agendas that lots of people have not voted on, and also don't seem to be doing that well for our cities if London is anything to go by. There are lots of funders into these schemes that most taxpayers have no idea exist. A lot of foreign funding going into these schemes. These schemes are then being carried out by Sadiq Khan, who is the co-chair of C40 cities, along with other global governments. And many leaders are now going to Bloomberg schools to learn how to be mayors and other nonsense. Prince William really shouldn't get involved in this. I think it's too late, really. Part of me wonders whether he just wants to actually abolish the monarchy, because he's certainly acting like that's what we should do. There are so many people gunning for the monarchy anyway. A lot of them, like Zara Sultana, Clive Lewis, a lot of people in left-wing networks that actually link round to Andy Burnham. So we're going to be seeing a lot more of this, I predict. Prince William is alienating his allies because he's cozying up to Democrat networks. People like Bloomberg, for instance. Bloomberg ran as the nominee for the presidential nomination for Democrats in 2020. Even with his huge funds behind him, he didn't make it. So now we've been dumped with him instead. Prince William, I don't know who he's getting his advice from, but he's going to totally alienate the population that really likes the monarchy, which is mostly social conservatives. Something needs to happen, some sort of intervention.
Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. While I respect William and Catherine, I am struggling to feel hopeful that things will change once William takes the throne, particularly when it comes to finally addressing Harry and Meghan. We're now 10 years into this saga, and there have been countless opportunities to handle the situation decisively. But what are we seeing? The same old rinse and repeat news cycles. These reporters continue to keep rehashing what went on in the past, and yes, we know that Harry and Meghan reportedly stepped back from the institution in 2020. But does anybody believe that now? I know I certainly don't believe it. Until the palace provides clarification, then I'm in the camp that Harry and Meghan never really left the institution. You know, at this point, you can't trust what these journalists are reporting, and there is no official record confirming this by the UK government. One would think that if Harry and Meghan stepped back and weren't working royals anymore, then the UK government in some sense would acknowledge that to make it official. But there's nothing on record of such, aside from Parliament having the discussion about the Councillor of State, indicating that Harry doesn't live in the UK anymore. It doesn't say that Harry doesn't represent the monarchy anymore. But I digress. As I explained in my recent videos, the royal family's decision, possibly to absorb the racist accusations, was likely a calculated psychological warfare tactic. The short-term pain strengthened the institution in the long run, reinforcing public support for a family that most people already knew wasn't racist. When you look back at all of this, the attacks ultimately did very little damage to the monarchy's brand. In fact, they have made it more resilient. With that being said, when we look at Prince William, he's very much a globalist. And while I believe he means well, There clearly is a strong financial and reputational ROI in continuing on this climate change narrative. Now, this is just my opinion, but anyone who thinks his life of service comes without personal or institutional benefit has bought into the idea that William can do no wrong. I suspect he's driven by a genuine desire to leave the world a better place for his children, but he seems blind to how these aggressively pushed climate policies are devastating the lives of ordinary folk like you and I.
States, but I worry about Europe. I love Europe. I love the people of Europe. And I hate to see it being devastated by energy and immigration. This double-tailed monster destroys everything in its wake, and they cannot let that happen any longer. You're doing it because you want to be nice, you want to be politically correct, and you're destroying your heritage. They must take control strongly and immediately of the unmitigated immigration disaster and the fake energy catastrophe before it's too late. The carbon footprint is a hoax made up by people with evil intentions, and they're heading down a path of total destruction. You know, the carbon footprint was a big, big thing a few years ago. I remember hearing about the carbon footprint, and then President Obama would get into Air Force One, a massive Boeing 747, and not a new one, an old one with old engines that spew everything into the atmosphere. He'd talk about the carbon footprint, we must do so. Then he'd get in and he'd fly from Washington to Hawaii to play a round of golf.
The royal family's partnership with the United Nations, particularly William, is troubling to me. The United Nations has actively worked to undermine Western civilization, democracy, and national sovereignty in its pursuit of global control. It is a historical fact that the UN has facilitated the demographic replacement of the indigenous people across the West, including the British people, as well as enabled policies that many view as contributing to the erosion of European cultures. Beyond that, its track record includes serious failures and worse around issues like child trafficking. Yet here is William standing alongside them promoting climate alarmism that is harming young people's mental health.
Thank you all for taking part in London's Climate Action Week. Climate change is growing more deadly and costly. The U.S. has had its worst spring drought in record history. Last month, the U.K. had its hottest May temperature ever. In January, parts of South Africa got a year's worth of rain in 10 days. Yesterday, we made a new commitment to support clean energy in developing countries where energy needs are growing fastest. Progress is being made from the bottom up by cities, states, and regions, businesses, and investors. Over the past decade, emissions in the world's biggest cities have gone down even as global emissions have gone up. To date, 28 countries have either phased out coal completely or have committed to do so.
Michael Bloomberg, thank you for your long-standing and outstanding leadership on climate action. The world cannot go back. We cannot double down on a system that is driving both the climate crisis and the energy crisis. Every fraction of a degree matters. Every moment counts. Renewables are the cornerstone of true energy security. Because the renewables revolution is well underway. A revolution of clean power, electrification, falling costs, rising ambition, and vast opportunity. This is our moment of choice, our moment.
You are incredibly naive if you believe that Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of socialist New York City, billionaire tycoon who has given nearly $3 billion over the past 10 years to this climate crap, is doing this because he actually cares about the environment. If you look here, Michael Bloomberg has profited immensely off of this climate scam hoax, with his net worth now being a total of $14.9 billion. So as you can see, Bloomberg's growth has been substantial, coinciding with the rise of ESG, sustainable finance, and climate. You know, when you look at the trend, Bloomberg's for-profit performance has increased significantly, and that is tied to the climate ESG offerings that have grown in relevance to the advocacy work that all of these climate nut jobs have been doing. It's pretty much opened up a whole market of grift. This is what these billionaires use philanthropy for. It's to help their for-profit businesses. When you look at Harry and Meghan, why do you think they have Archwell Foundation and then Archwell Inc.? These globalist elite use their philanthropy to drive change, but change that will benefit their for-profit businesses. And you can bet that the royal family are doing the same thing, but the public is not privy to seeing their private investments being made in offshore accounts where they're housing all of this money. Some of you may or may not know that the royal family do use offshore accounts. It was leaked in the Panama Papers that Queen Elizabeth had these offshore accounts that had been exposed from these documents in which it was not reported. It was reported 4 days ago that King Charles plans on revealing his tax bill to the public on Thursday. Now, the whole spin on this is that this will be a new element included in the annual royal financial accounts. And Buckingham Palace says the move is part of a modernizing drive for greater transparency and to encourage wider understanding of their accountability. By now, I think people are aware that everything that the royal family puts out into the public is purely for optics. Yeah, I do believe this is part of distancing away from Andrew and his ties to Sleazy E, especially when it comes to the financial aspect to it. In tomorrow's information, we're expected to see tax on his income, such as profits from the Duchy of Lancaster, and any personal investments and earnings from the king's private estates, such as Sandringham and Balmoral. I doubt we're going to see anything tied to offshore accounts or other investments that have been made, whether it be in his Sustainable Markets Initiative, whether it be investments into other companies. I don't think we're going to see any of that. I feel like the palace is giving the public just enough to keep everybody satisfied and at bay. Now, while this is all great that Charles wants to be more transparent with the public, nobody really knows the net worth or actual net worth of the royal family. And that's because this information has been heavily guarded. So when you look at Prince Harry and you think about his status here in the United States, there's no other option that I see he would fall under, which would be this protected diplomatic class, in which the IRS would be prevented from investigating or auditing him during tax season. And the reason why I think Harry would keep his status is to prevent any type of exposure into the net worth of this family. Because, if America gets in there and starts investigating and sees all these billions, we're going to come after you to try and get our hands on it. So I think part of the reason why we are so in the dark about this guy's status here in the United States is because, to a certain extent, he has that protection. That's just my speculation at this point. But anyway, back to this climate change hoax. You see, all of these globalists had doubled down on it because they were making money off of it. And I don't doubt that William is some way, in some form, profiting from it as well. That's the only explanation that I can give right now, especially after the UN came out back in May to withdraw their climate conclusion, confirming to everybody that the whole thing has been one giant scam.
Now the United Nations has withdrawn their worst case conclusion on climate. Now they had been thinking that temperatures would go up by 8 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century and that the polar ice caps would melt completely. Daniel Turner is with us this morning. I thought that UN declaration, they abandoned that forecast, I thought that was a very big deal for climate science.
It really was, but I think there needs to be a reckoning because this wasn't just a mistake in climate calculations or in science. There are whole countries that destroyed their economies. The UK shut down the North Sea oil and gas, right? We have entire nations that have crippled themselves and made themselves energy poor because of climate change. And not only that, generationally, how many young children have grown up with real climate climate anxiety, that are convinced they're going to die. These scientists, for political reasons, did great damage to the world. And it's not enough for them to say, oops, we made a mistake. There needs to be a reckoning for this.
What would be a reckoning? What would it be?
They lose all of their funding. They are discredited. They have to offer formal statements. They should be forced to go around to schools and tell young people, you don't have to be worried about climate change.
That's not going to happen.
Of course not. But it's not enough to just say, hey, we made a mistake. And they did this for political calculations, and that's what's wrong.
Now, you can agree to disagree with me, but this is about money as well as power. And when you look at William and the moves that he's been making, he's not a stupid man, unlike the other one. And I do think he does mean well, but there is an ROI for him. But what concerns me is the company that he and his wife, Catherine, are keeping. It's being reported that Princess Catherine hosted Melinda Gates yesterday at Windsor. I can't officially confirm it, but the relationship appears to be ongoing. Melinda visited Catherine around the same time last year, in case you didn't know. This is the same Melinda Gates who previously collaborated with Meghan Markle on girls' digital wellness initiatives. These efforts stand in stark contrast to the silence from all three of these high-profile women on the grooming gangs and the horrific abuse of British Christian women and girls across the UK. None of them have used their platforms to address this crisis. This is specifically striking with Melinda. If she is truly an advocate for women and girls, why hasn't she spoken out in support of Sleazy E's victims to atone for her and her husband's involvement with him? Particularly if her heart goes out to them. Like, you can't take these people serious. You really can't. You know, in this post last week that was made by the Prince and Princess of Wales, I found incredibly tone deaf because this was around the same time the grooming gang inquiry report was released. And this just shows us a disconnect, and it makes it harder to dismiss the idea that much of all of this is just theater to serve the agenda. What better way to indoctrinate than to get in on the malleable minds of young people, right? This is why they're always talking about mental health and the youth. You never see them focusing on the elderly and trying to develop them or develop them with love. I bet all of these women that have had their childhood stolen from them from these grooming gangs would welcome experiencing the world through feeling love. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that? When we look back at everything that has gone on over the last 10 years and nothing was done to stop it, one has to think, what if, just hear me out, what if the Sussex squad and their online attacks on Catherine were not what they appeared? What if the goal was to always position Catherine as a victim, with the quote-unquote threat carefully managed? And William and Catherine were fully aware of it being a part of this black ops to drive the regulation online. We have seen how far globalist networks will go to deceive the public in service of this Agenda 2030. Do not forget, it was William who started this curbing of the online space back in 2017. And then suddenly, no explanation of why the Royal Foundation stopped its focus on fighting online bullying. But suddenly, right after that, Meghan and Harry are driving the exact same agenda over in the US, but more aggressively, without the appearance of the shackles of this institution that is supposed to not get involved in political affairs, especially interfering with the rights of citizens in another country. You know, it sure does make you think, huh?
For me, the issue of cyberbullying and its consequences are personal. My work as a HEMS pilot, air ambulance pilot, has exposed me to the tragedy of suicide and the despair felt by those who've been subjected to cruelty and abuse. Through my work on mental health, I've spent time getting to know parents and children for whom the impact of online bullying has been devastating. And as a parent myself, I understand the sense of loss and anger of those particular families who have lost children after they were the targets of campaigns of harassment. I feel a responsibility to do what I can to help. The UK can become a world leader on tackling cyberbullying. Nowhere else has the sector come together and voluntarily agreed to take collective responsibility for tackling an issue like this rather than just promoting your own individual initiatives.
Isn't it remarkable how similar William's messaging is to that of Harry and Meghan's? A couple of important details to notice here. This was ABC News reporting on this, an American media outlet, with Caroline Durand being the one reporting on it. Now, if you've been following the saga, that name should ring a bell for you, because Caroline Durand was co-authored on the Fugazi book Finding Freedom. This was the propaganda that was written as the official narrative by Harry and Meghan on why they had to flee the United Kingdom. Why is it that nobody ever questioned Caroline Durand, especially during the court case with Meghan suing the Daily Mail? Why was it only Omid Scobie that was brought up into this court case? How come nobody asked Caroline Durand if she worked with the Harkles? Makes you wonder, right? Could it be that this court case was also a show? Because when you look back at the certain pieces of information that was deliberately released to the public, but not everything else, it makes you wonder, right? We're supposed to believe that the monarch's justice system, at the time it was Queen Elizabeth, is fair and just. But when you look at Meghan lying in this court case and she was not held accountable for it, it makes you wonder, right? And then when Meghan Markle won her court case and was given £1 as compensation, it makes you wonder, right? Everything has been one giant lie. Which brings me now to question this. You have Ian Ralston with Sophie Chandoka from Sentabali. Ian was brought in as a trustee and consultant to Sentabali. Now, for those that don't remember, Ian Ralston previously was chairing Prince William's conservation organization called the Tusk Trust. Now, this guy had been introduced to all of us when Sophie Chandoka did this interview. Prior to that, nobody knew that he joined Sentabali, but many were saying that it's possible that William was stepping in here after it was disclosed that allegedly Harry had bullied Sophie Chandoka, trying to force her out. What doesn't make sense to me is if Prince Harry indeed has this rift with Prince William, then why would he be comfortable having one of Prince William's so-called advisors helping with Sentabali? Because clearly in 2024, when Harry went to Africa, there Ian Ralston was standing there. Now, what I find really curious is that Sophie Chandoka had announced 3 months ago on March 24, 2026, that she was going to be suing Harry and Mark Dwyer for defamation, libel, and slander. Well, since this has been entered into the court system, there has been no update since, such as papers being served, I guess, as well as Harry and Mark Dwyer getting lawyers. So my question here, folks, is this a serious lawsuit? Because to me, it seems rather odd that there has been no activity now going on 3 months. Seems a little bit weird, right? I would think if this was indeed a serious lawsuit, then we would see the system update with whoever is going to be representing Prince Harry and Mark Dwyer. And I wonder, is this going to be another show that we're going to be watching unfold like what we saw with Meghan Markle and her court case? It sort of feels like it. We're at this point where it has been nonstop drama for the last 10 years, and the media, as well as all of the PR, is not cheap. There's no way that Harry and Meghan have been doing this on their own. Because when you look at some of these initiatives that Harry and Meghan have been driving full force on the down low, they align with organizations that the royals are not only patrons of, but are tightly aligned with. So one has to ask the question, if indeed there is this so-called family fracture and division, why would any of these organizations choose to work with Meghan Markle? One has to ask the important question of why would Princess Catherine align herself with Melinda French Gates, especially knowing her connection to Sleazy E. In addition to that, we know that there is this rift, allegedly, with the family. Why would you tie yourself to somebody who has an active relationship with your arch nemesis? It doesn't make any kind of sense, unless it's just not real. But we're made to believe that this feud has been going on to keep us distracted. Now, I'm not saying that this is exactly what is happening and going on. I'm just speculating because what other explanation is there for all of this madness and absurdity? What we're failing to realize is that while we're all distracted, None of the people pushing these agendas ever feel the pain they inflict on the population. And for centuries, the British imperial system has profited from the suffering of others through wars, economic exploitation, and now it seems with these manufactured crises. There's plenty of focus now on mental health and early childhood development, yet almost none on the extreme physical and sexual abuse occurring in their own backyard. And isn't it something that you have the United Nations, along with Prince William, forcing this climate change bullshit down people's throats, demanding at least $1.3 trillion a year to help fight this climate change, but remain silent on an actual genocide that's happening in the UK right now against the indigenous white people.
We must do far more to protect people and communities from the here and now effects of climate chaos. Because even at full speed, we cannot outrun climate change. Its impacts are already here, compounding and cascading. Africa is home to 60% of the world's best solar resources, 30% of critical minerals, and 1/5 of humanity. Yet it receives just 2% of global clean energy investment. At the same time, more than 600 million Africans still lack access to electricity. This is unjust and a lost opportunity for Africa and the world. Developed countries must keep their promises, including support to the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and the Green Climate Fund. The $300 billion pledged to developing countries must be delivered with concrete steps to mobilize the $1.3 trillion a year by 2035. In a world of shrinking aid, we must also unleash the catalytic role of multilateral development banks and the wider development finance system to help fund long-term infrastructure such as grids, mass transit, and water systems. Recent reforms and policy decisions have increased the lending capacity of multilateral development banks by $600 to $800 billion. They must use it aggressively to finance the infrastructure of the future and climate adaptation. They must also adapt their instruments to match the scale and time frame of the challenge, including 50-year finance where needed.
Yeah, screw these people. You have all of these billionaires who claim to be humanitarians. Well, if they all pitched in, they could pretty much cobble together $300 billion. Like, why is the United States always on the hook to saving the rest of the world? That's not our job. We need to save our own people. You know, the most irritating thing about all of these people is that the United States' generosity has been abused and taken advantage of. There should be no excuse after all the billions, probably in the trillions at this point, after decades of giving money in aid to help other countries, that places don't have electricity or people are not getting food or don't have food. In fact, it's shameful that in a first world country in the UK that there's so much hunger and poverty going on. Like, maybe these people need to look at themselves first before they start lecturing and chastising the United States because we are declining our aid. The audacity of these people who feel entitled to taking the U.S. taxpayer money for their own selfish greed. You know, when you think about all of these countries that the United States have generously given to, especially Europe and NATO, and how they have treated us in return, they can all go fuck themselves. And that's kind of the attitude that right now the Trump administration has, because it's not helping the United States. When we were invaded by this illegal migration funded by our own taxpayer dollars coming through from the United Nations, nobody bothered to help the citizens here. So yeah, I'm pretty much done here. And the fact that Prince William and Catherine are aligned with all of these people but still want to make you believe that they are on the good side, I don't know, I'm having a real hard time. Because it is quite disappointing that neither William nor Catherine reacted in the smallest way. They didn't have to do much, but in the smallest way, bring awareness and attention to the seriousness of what's happening to these children in the UK. And their silence, to me, speaks volumes. It tells me everything I need to know about where their priorities are and what they are about.
And they used to call it global warming, but that didn't work because it started getting colder.
They even called it many years ago global cooling, but those things don't work. So now they call it climate change, because with climate change you can't lose. The whole thing is a hoax. And your country, among others, but your country is one of the worst. You talk about UK, it's one of the worst in the world. They believe this nonsense, this fiction.
Now, the last thing that I want to say before I go is just keep in the back of your minds that everything that we're seeing being put out by the royal family or being reported on by the mainstream media is most likely controlled and carefully curated to make sure that the brand stays intact. And whatever narrative that they're trying to force down people's throats to believe in, just know that it's all intentional. There's a reason behind what they've been doing. And, it's yet to be seen on how this is all going to end. But I do predict, and it does seem like it's going in that direction, that at some point, William will be reconciling with his brother. And that Meghan, in my opinion, is not going to ever return back to the UK because she was never the long-term strategy in the first place, in my opinion. But that's kind of what I'm seeing right now. Anyhow, let me know what you guys think. Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
It was such a fraud.